Welcome to Food Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph, Ontario, Canada, and on a podcast on all the major platforms. My name is Paul Smith. I'm one of the hosts of Food Farm Talk, and the others are Emily Duncan and Abdul Rahim Abdullahi. Soil health and conservation has again become a very popular topic in Canadian agriculture, and the Soil Conservation Council is really the only national organization working on soil conservation. And today we're pleased to have Jim Totarchuk, the executive director of the council, to talk about the council and its work. Back in November of 2021, the council had their virtual Summit on Canadian Soil Health with the theme Healthy Soil, Healthy Planet. And they also sponsor the annual Soil Conservation Week in April each year. And that often has a focus on soil your undies, with that weird combination of underwear, soil, and microbiota in the soil. And that's garnered a lot of media attention and public interest in the last few years. And Jim can tell us about these and many other activities of the council. So we're broadcasting here from the treaty lands of the Mississauga, the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabeg. And please follow our podcast and our Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook accounts. So thanks for coming on the show, Jim. Appreciate your time coming in from Manitoba.
Thanks for having me.
And so why don't we just start with you introducing yourself a bit and talking about how you came to be with the Soil Conservation Council so listeners can understand a bit about you and your background.
Sure. Well, just a little bit of my own background. Paul, I completed a master's degree in soil science back in 1982. Seems like a long time ago. And following that, I stayed at the university for a couple of years to teach and to do research. So I have those educational backgrounds and some research experience. And then in 1986, I moved to the provincial government here in Manitoba, where I worked for a number of years, and again in the area of soils and soil management. And in 1991, I moved on to working for the federal government. For those of, if anybody from Western Canada is listening, I worked for PFRA for most of that time. But all of the time that I worked for AAFC up until my retirement in 2013 was generally in the area of soils, soil conservation, and agro-environmental issues. So over the 40 years that spans, I've got a very big interest and a lot of experience in soil health management, conservation, and seeing some of the benefits that are coming from that. So that's who I am. I live in Manitoba. It was a mild 31 degrees here this morning, and then apparently 2 days from now it's going to be 0. So if you don't like the weather, look out the window.
That was good.
It'll change.
Thanks, Jim. And I learned a bit more about you that way from that too. So maybe you can now talk about the council itself. It's been around for about more than 30 years. And can you talk a bit about where it came from, the origins, and some of the members, corporate and individual, and about the history of how it's evolved?
Sure. So we actually, the council, long before I was part of it, got our start from a study commissioned by the Senate of Canada in 1984. Senator Sparrow from Saskatchewan sought and received authority from the Senate through the Agriculture and Forestry Committee to conduct a detailed survey of soil and water health across Canada over a couple of years of time. And just when you get a chance, Google soils at risk, and you can read the whole thing. There's some really interesting consultations and quite a number of recommendations. But the one relevant to this discussion is that one of his recommendations was to form an organization like the Soil Conservation Council of Canada that could focus in on these issues with farmers and scientists and decision makers across the country. So that's how we got started. Since that time, we have evolved from simply being conservation oriented to also seeing that soil health is just as important as conservation. And so that's a change that I've been around for in the last 7 years, where we moved from simply worrying about wind and water erosion to doing that, plus thinking more about how we keep our soils healthy in Canada. So we are a farmer-based organization. We have a membership of individuals that range around 100 or so every year. It's not a big population. But we also work with groups like Fertilizer Canada, Crop Life Canada, Ducks Unlimited, and for those of you in Ontario, provincial groups like Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association. And I'll stop naming organizations now because I don't want to miss any, but we take some pride in keeping a really good relationship with a lot of other organizations in Canada that we can collaborate with. And so we have in the past done work on greenhouse gas reduction. We've done work with Fertilizer Canada in training for our training trainers for our nutrient management projects. And I think one of the most recent ones that was a great deal of fun was Operation Pollinator, which is a program we ran with Syngenta Canada, looking at taking so-called marginal lands, less profitable lands out of production, putting them into pollinator habitat and managing those for a couple of years. So we do a range of things, and I know we'll get into some of the other things later on, Paul. I think that gives you sort of a flavor of where we've come from over the years.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's the origins you mentioned back with the Senate investigation into soils at risk with Herb Sparrow. It's a really important one that probably lots of younger people, millennials and Gen Zers, wouldn't be aware of. And I always like to think of this, the current interest in soil we have now is sort of like the third wave, and the wave associated with soils at risk was kind of like your second wave after the dirty 30s wave of that was sparked public interest as well. So I think that's a really good, and I didn't realize the connection with the specific recommendation. So that's really interesting to hear.
Yeah. Well, and I think when we look at things, and I'll link back to this later on if we get a chance, but there are opportunities that come along in time, and you just referred to them as waves, where we have a real opportunity to bring soil health, soil conservation, and just the interest of Canadians to understanding how important soil is to them and some of the benefits that it brings to them. And so we have to watch for those opportunities. And Senator Sparrow, I actually knew him a little bit. He was a very insightful guy, but also really dedicated to the land, and because he was born and raised in a Saskatchewan farm, and still to the day he died was part of the operation. So he had a personal stake in it, but he also had a larger stake in it. And I think he recognized the power of engaging the public in our work in the soil conservation realm.
Yeah, that's great. Now we have Rob Black as a champion in the Senate again. So the National Soil Summit that you had back in November, that's one of your regular activities every couple of years. And it's one of the few events that's national events, at least, that's focused on soil conservation. And I had the privilege of being part of this one and a couple of previous ones. So maybe you can talk a bit about that summit and it as a regular item that you do, and what you're trying to accomplish with that one in particular.
Sure. Yeah, we try to do one every second year. Well, we don't try, we do. And it got a little trickier this year with COVID. But they are they are opportunities for people in the business to meet together, and usually in person, to talk about the issues of the day, to talk about new directions, to just share experiences. One of the things we always do in our summits is we make sure that we have good scientists and good observers like you, Paul, and when you spoke for us this year, but also that we share experiences of farmers so that they're able to tell people how they have achieved their goals in soil conservation and health, and share that with other people. The summit this year was really a finer focus on um, looking at the types of benefits that good soil management, soil health management, conservation management, utility management can bring to Canadians, so that we understand those better. Not all of them are at the farm gate. Many of them are ones that that affect people not involved in farming. So we wanted to try to gather that together and help build understanding of that. We wanted to also, as we always do, share our collective information on how soil management systems can be put in place that do these things. And there were a number of farmers that spoke, and some technical people and scientists that shared their knowledge and experience there. The part that was that I thought was well, new but important for us is that we also spent a lot of time talking about how we measure, monitor, and communicate our results in soil health. And I can link back to that one later on. So it was sort of a three-pronged approach this year. One, let's examine the benefits. Let's talk about how we manage to those benefits, and then how do we communicate our success to other people.
Yeah, you also had, as part of that, sort of regional discussions as well that focused on Western Canada and Ontario and the East. And
yeah,
were there things that came out of those that were that you're going to be acting on, or?
Yeah, there were a couple of key things, and it's nice to see in a country like Canada that you can get groups like that together from different regions in different rooms, and apart for some really fine detail, they come out with kind of the same things. And that's what we saw with those regional groups that you talked about, is that the expression of what they thought we needed was different, but in general, they were the same pieces. And the first thing that I saw in the groups that I took part in, and reported by others, is that there's a really strong desire and interest on the part of producers to keep learning, to seek change, and to apply that in their farms. So although farmers are by nature careful, I think we're past the point where we have the late adopters, people that are resistant to change. I think most of the people that we encounter are looking for new ways of doing business for lots of reasons. I think we also heard and saw that we need more information in two areas. One, economics, and that's what you spoke to, Paul. Thank you again for that. But I've been around for 40 years in this business, and one of the things that I've always found a little frustrating is that the actual economic case for conservation and now for soil health has not really been well made over time. I think we're getting there. I think because that's becoming one of the obvious missing pieces in the puzzle. But it was good to see it brought out as a major need that we have to have, because as the old saying goes, on the farm, if it pays, it stays. And farmers are business people, and they need to and deserve to make a living from what they're doing. And so we need to be able to start to make that case for the economics of it. The other thing that I noticed in my participation in this event was that there's a real strong call out there for more technical expertise and information on the ground. And, many examples of people who had access to farm advisors that really didn't know or really even think about soil health and soil conservation. And so I think we need to make sure that in the future that we get more of that on the landscape, either through training ag professionals, more peer-to-peer work, more use of webinars, more concentrated effort is needed there. So those were my major takeaways.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, just on the economics, it is interesting that how people talk about that a lot. And as you said, the actual empirical study of it is lagging behind some of the more scientific aspects, and how we talk a lot about it, but show me the money is kind of the expression, right? So pays it stays, and show me the money, and all those things kind of come together. And although I must admit, having just been involved in something like along those lines, as you mentioned, it is pretty slippery too, and the prices change. And so right now it's very interesting because of the price of nitrogen is so high that the case for a lot of these practices is even better than it's been for many years because of the sky high prices.
Yeah. Well, I guess if it was easy, it would have been done by now. But
yes,
you're quite right. It's a moving target, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. Yeah, but also if it's a priority, it gets done too. So you mentioned the idea of monitoring and technical ways of charting progress, and so one of the things that you folks publicize in the Soil Conservation Week is the Soil Your Undies test, which is sort of a lighthearted way of looking at monitoring for soil health, and that sort of captures media's attention. And I've been amazed over the last couple of years as it's been done by the council, how you kind of combine the bit of the yuck factor and the underwear and all these things, and it grabs people's attention. Like soil doesn't grab people's attention very easily, so this seems to have caught people's attention. And I do remember hearing a piece on the British Broadcasting Corporation about this Canadian initiative, and I think it was Alan Frizzle who was on the BBC at that point. And so can you talk a bit about that whole initiative and the effect it's having on people's perception of soils?
Yeah, and it's right as you said in your intro. It's a light treatment of a very very complicated scientific process, but the sort of the science lesson here is that this is really about proving that soils are living, breathing entities, and that it really matters how we treat them. If we do certain things, we'll kill it. If we do other certain things, we'll make it healthier. And so it's really hard to sort of show that in any way. So we came across some experience from Europe, where they were using strips of cotton buried in soil, and they were trying to come to some scientific way of determining the biological activity of the soil, which is a symbol of health. That's not the whole story, but biologically active soils usually are healthy. So if the soil is biologically active, the critters in there want carbon. That's their food source, and cotton is a very rich source of carbon, so they will eat that. They'll digest that, and then you can examine the extent of decomposition of your sample of cotton and determine, relatively speaking, whether that soil is biologically active or not. So long story short is what we do with help from a lot of partners and from forgetting the name of the menu, Stanfields, sorry about that, can we edit that later? With the help of Stanfields Canada, we've been able to supply schools and partnerships or partners and local organizations with plain white men's underwear, cotton underwear. And so as soon as the soil's thawed in the spring, you go out and bury them, and you leave just a little corner sticking above the ground, mark it, and come back in late June or maybe even July, dig it up, and then have a look at the degree of decomposition that's occurred. And so we've got stories and photos and experiences from all across the country where people will dig it up and there'll be nothing left but the elastic band and no undies. So in that case, the obvious conclusion is there's a lot of life in the soil. The soil must be fairly healthy, so that's good. And we've had ones that have come back that for one reason or another, there's very little decomposition. And so that's the opportunity. I've only had one of those personally at a canola field day here a couple of years ago, where one came out that I buried, and it was, you could have laundered it and worn them. But so the question was asked, well, why did that happen? And your other 10 samples are pretty much consumed. And so we went back to the area and looked, and it was an area that had been eroded, a knoll, top of a knoll. And there are all kinds of reasons why it wasn't as biologically active.
Yeah.
But the point is that's the opportunity where you can have that discussion. So, well, why? How come that pretty much dissolved in the soil? This one came out wearable. So, and then you can begin to have that conversation with kids and people, and it raises their awareness of soils. And maybe they treat their lawns and gardens better. Maybe they now understand how complicated it is for farmers to make their decisions and how they manage their land. So everybody's a winner.
Yeah, it is a good attention grabber, and as you say, it sparks conversations and so on. I did one in my backyard this past year. It was pretty good soil, so most of it was gone, and I did see it was very interesting. I saw at a soil and crop annual meeting a young guy. He was in middle school, and he did for his science fair project. He used this technique on different fields, and he did went to a science fair with it, and then he won some awards for it too. So I thought that was kind of interesting, that especially at middle school, when it's a little awkward around things like this. Helps to be in a rural school probably, but where it's a topic. But I thought that was really good illustration of how young people kind of can relate to it, and it has that interesting attraction.
Well, so it's I think the most important thing about it is that it gets people other than people in agriculture talking about it and beginning to think about soils as more than just dirt, and that realizing that what you do to soil does matter. So it's a fun thing to do. It snaps heads every year.
Yeah, and it's a very low tech, which is good too. There's lots of high tech stuff for studying soils that we could do an entire show on, but this is a low tech kind of experiential thing, which is good. We need more of that too. Mm-hmm. So, and along those lines, another effort of the council is this soil health report card, looking at kind of you do an assessment of how soil conservation is working out in different parts of the country, on a kind of good, bad, excellent, and that sort of scale. And so that's a pretty useful, these sort of report cards are very useful in many areas of government policy to kind of spur action. So maybe you can tell us about the report card, and I know you're doing things with it to make it even better for next year. And so you can tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, the idea came to us through Dr. Mario Tenuta at the University of Manitoba, and he had been playing with the idea, and I think it came to him as he was looking at one of his kids' report cards, that it told a story very succinctly, and in not in a neutral sense, in a neutral sort of language. And he thought, well, what if we could do this with soils in Canada? And so in 2019, we asked him to present his thoughts at our summit in Winnipeg that year, and got a lot of interest. And it was a very simple, really just a couple of observations from Mario and his colleagues across the country. They put their heads together and boldly struck out to share some opinions about soil health across Canada. And since then, we've been working with Mario and others to. Well, the part I missed is that the release of that got a lot of information. Mario got a lot of calls. We got a lot of calls from media, and people were kind of interested in this. And so we thought, well, we need to do more. So what we're doing now is we're trying to do a couple of things. One is to, well, most importantly, make the information behind the scenes more robust. Because if people are going to pay attention to this, we have an obligation to make it as correct as we can make it. So we're trying to get better information on soil health, more observers, we're calling them informed observers, and build the database and try to normalize that database so that we're really making valid comparisons across regions and from year to year. And if we can keep this going for a while, it'll give us trends, and that's the most important thing. And it may not be, it's not peer-reviewed science, but I think it's going to be good enough that it will be influential in people's thinking, influential in how we can inform policymakers and program designers in Canada to do things. But it'll still be something that your grandmother can read and would understand. And it's not, like I said, it's not peer-reviewed science, but we're going to make it as close to that as we can. So more data and more people doing the observations, and we're going to be expanding the kinds of information that we're asking people. So it'll be a few years in that phase, and hopefully we get a product out at the end that really gives us the pulse of soil health in Canada.
Yeah, no, I think it is the technique. The report card technique is a sort of tried and true for I know consumer groups and environmental groups do these sorts of things fairly frequently, and as you say, the media pays attention because it can be a point of talking to politicians or talking to scientists about, well, why is that, an F or a D in your particular region or province. So it's a good tool, and hopefully will spark more conversations about the whole soil health in any particular region.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know the last few years, you and I have chatted about this before, about another project you have on the go that funded called the Soil Carbon Roadmap, and that was talked about at your summit as well. So it's a really interesting project. So maybe you can outline for us what that project is and what the findings were, and what you hope to do with that.
Sure. Well, yeah, you're right. It's been a long project. It's a project we've done in cooperation with the Compost Council of Canada, who also shares an interest and passion for soil health. And really, the whole point of the study was to help more people put more carbon into soil and keep it there. So enhancing soil carbon is the roadmap we were trying to build. And so we looked at a number of areas of challenge in doing that. We looked, first of all, at growing the understanding of carbon in soil, how it fluctuates and what affects it. To understand a little bit of the science of how that works, to look at some of the constraints that people have in managing to enhance soil carbon. We certainly looked at the benefits of that. And then we looked at in the end of the study, one of the things that we looked at very closely was the role that enhancing soil carbon in Canada can have in reducing our carbon footprint. And I'll circle back to that one in a minute. But we will be releasing the full study hopefully in the next 2 weeks. We're just cleaning up some graphics at this point, but that will be on our website, soilcc.ca, very, very shortly for everybody to read. But I'll give you my top three, if you will, Paul, of what I hope people can get out of the study when they read it. And I think first is we have, excuse me, we have a real opportunity in the scientific information we have on soil carbon. What we found in the study is that's not the constraint. There's lots of good information there. Our understanding of the science, the biology and chemistry of soil carbon is pretty good. And so we have that understanding of how that world of soil carbon functions and fluctuates. The second thing is we have a lot of good experience and a lot of capacity in developing management plans and management practices that can enhance soil carbon. So we've got that going for us. And so if we can pull those two things together, we can see, and we did some calculations on what the impact of various levels of implementing good soil management practices would be. And if all goes well, the perfect story is that we have enough science knowledge and knowledge on how to manage soils that if we can promote it properly, we can take a large chunk out of agriculture's carbon footprint in Canada, and that is a huge thing. That makes managing soil carbon very important for our industry. So those are my top three from the study. There are 11 recommendations that I don't want to go through right now, but because that would take a lot longer than I think you want to give me. But we do make 11 specific recommendations about actions that we think we need to see support this one, 2, and 3 coming together. And as I say, that will be publicly available. We're hoping by mid-February.
Yeah, well, this is very topical given the focus on climate change and carbon sequestration and that by the federal government too, in terms of offsets, either regulatory offsets or voluntary offsets and so on. Are you hoping that will feed into that process? Because I know they have a protocol development process too. Are you hoping that this study will help inform that kind of work?
Well, we hope it does, and not just that one specifically. The scope of our work was to look at building the roadmap, and how people use it is up to them. But it's designed for that very purpose, for people to be able to use it to fit their purpose in policy development. So yeah. It's going to be out there, and it's available for use as people decide.
Yeah, well, hopefully the feds will take advantage of that. So go through their, yeah, that's good. So are there any other kind of highlights from the work of the council that you'd like to point out before we sign off?
Yeah, I do. I just want to circle back around to where we started with Senator Sparrow, and you alluded to it earlier on, but I think I just like to sort of reiterate the point that we do have these opportunities to capture public attention and to influence policy to a greater extent from time to time. And Senator Black has proposed to the Senate Ag and Forestry Committee that we undertake a study of soil health that would update the work that Senator Sparrow did 35 years ago. And I really think the timing couldn't be better than it is right now, given the rise in interest and importance of soil health and conservation in Canada. And so I would just ask people in the business to watch for that. It's a public process. There will be opportunities for people to support it and contribute knowledge to it. And I think that it may be the next most important thing that comes into our world of soil health in the next while.
Yeah, Senator Black has been doing a good job promoting the idea at various meetings. I keep seeing his name on the agendas of various meetings promoting it. And I thought of getting him on the podcast and radio show here to talk a bit about it. And maybe I'll put that on my futures list.
I think that would be a very good idea.
Yeah. But, yeah, thanks a lot for coming on the show, Jim. And we look forward to maybe we'll get an update on future work sometime in the future on the show. And thanks to all of the listeners on CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph and on podcast. And you can check out the show notes or the links in our show notes and on our social media feeds to the work of the Soil Conservation Council. And please tune in again for another episode of Food Farm Talk in coming weeks.
Thanks for having me on, Paul.